Hello again, everyone, and welcome to this episode of One-on-One. I'm Martin Falls, very pleased to have with us Constable Dale Theriot. Now, you may not know him just on the surface, but if you do large in those areas, you will know him. But certainly, his claim to fame now, he's raised a son that's the police chief here in Houma. So I know he's very proud of that, but there's so much more to Mr. Dale. We're going to talk about that on this episode of One-on-One. One-on-One is brought to you by the Law Office of Waits and Downer. And welcome back to One-on-One. I'm Martin Falls. As promised, Mr. Dale Theriot, a constable here in the parish. Good to see you, Mr. Dale.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a real honor to be here.
You know, I was talking to your son, the police chief, Travis Theriot. You know his name, and I'm just letting the audience know. I said, you know, of all the things your dad's been involved in, KCs, the fairs, constable, different things, I said, I got to get him on the One-on-One show. So I'm glad you're here. And, you know, you've done so much, but you have done it quietly. You don't seek the fanfare or anything. No. But let's go back to the early days. Where were you born?
I was born in Houma, 279 Walnut Street. That's where I grew up, right in front of that would be the street right in front of the hospital now.
Yeah.
And that's where we grew up. And back in those days, the streets still wasn't paved. It was gravel.
Now, was that one of the streets that was right on the water, or was that inner?
Those streets were all formed from when they dug the intercoastal.
Yeah.
The further back you went on those streets, the more marshland there was. And to this day, they still have a sinking problem with homes because the marsh was covered up with mud, but all those trees had rotted out. As all of that rots out, the dirt goes down, and it's still got a big-time problem. I got a rent house on Palm Avenue, and that's why I know that.
Yeah. What was it like growing up in that area during the time?
I wouldn't trade those days for anything. I was working when I was 12 years old, cutting grass, and then we laughed today, but we went on to be paper boys and day routes and night routes, working up early in the morning. And it taught you how to be a business person, because not only did you have to get up at that time in the morning, but you had to collect all of that, the money for the papers, turn it in for a penny a day, a penny a paper. Yeah. 1 penny.
And I remember that was one of the big jobs. Mm-hmm. I tried to get a paper out, but the Coles in the Domain family on my street had a lock on it. Mm-hmm. I mean, because they kept giving it to family members, but that was one of those jobs where you tried to get it. I think it went up to 50 cents on the routes per paper. Then I don't know what it eventually got to 2, and now it's a lost art.
Oh yeah.
You know? How many papers did you throw a day?
That was about 100 in the morning.
Yeah.
Anywhere from, depending on which route, how big they were, 78 to 100. And I even took on an extra job at that time. Some of the guys couldn't carry that many, so we'd go spot them out with the boss. I don't know if you knew Eddie Domingue, but he was the man running it. And one day we were delivering that, and we got rear-ended by DWI. Mm-hmm. Sent me from the front of that truck to the back, split my head wide open on the back steel door. I still got the scar.
I'll be.
Yeah.
But the memories, that's when Terrebonne was just I guess an outdoors kind of place. And I know you Travis had to get it from somebody. Did you like the outdoors a lot?
Oh yeah, we lived outdoors. The boys, once we moved to Dulars, each one of the boys, we had, the second house I owned had marshland behind it. Mm-hmm. And that's where they all wore out each a mud boat back there. They just hunt and fish and everything. That's why they all so outdoorsman.
Yeah. Tell the audience your career. What was your career? When did you get in it? And, why'd you choose it?
Well, when I came out of high school, I went to work for Philip LaCorn. He was a building contractor, and one of his sons is, well, two of his sons is, we graduated together. Friends from little boys. They all grew up, they grew up on Pecan Street. As we grew up, then I graduated. I went to work for them as an apprentice for 9 years. Went in my own business in 1979, I think it would be, building houses, and built. I never built spec houses. It was, as a person who wanted a house, I'd build it. I would never spec a house. I always had work. Always had.
Yeah. So what do you think it was? I guess in that business, your name is everything. And it's changed so much today as to how people do business. What was it like doing business back when you first got started?
Doing business back in the days, there was no signing the contracts and stuff like that. If a person wanted you to build a house, let's start. And you went on. You would bid it. The people wanted to know what it was going to cost. But it wasn't as much paperwork as you got today. Matter of fact, that's one of the reasons when I decided to retire, when they started coming out with all kinds of, you need a permit to do this, a permit. Yeah, I'm sure you experienced all of that putting this building together. I told my wife, I said, I don't want to experience all of that. Now the government's going to start telling me you got to build a house. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So I was at that age. I said, you know what, it's a good time to stop. I was building, Bobby Momon's house was the last house I built off of 311.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm.
And I guess it was different back then with subs and all. The subs were really, and they got some good subs today, but they got some bad ones too.
Yeah.
So as a contractor, you got to sort of know who you can trust and who you can't trust, right?
Once you got a good sub, you stay with them. It might cost you a little bit more, but to be able to sleep good at night means a lot. So when a man's going to tell you he's going to show up for work the next day, that's what I expected.
Right.
And it wasn't good if he didn't show up because, I needed to get work done. I wanted to, things to happen. So, but I always had good subs, the best.
And you were pretty regimented from what I hear. Where'd you get that from? Was that your mom who taught you that or your dad?
I would want to say I was self-taught. We didn't have much when we were raised. And I would say money-wise, we were poor. But love-wise, we were rich. So once I decided that, you couldn't go to your father and ask him for $2 or $3 or those days. You had to go out and make your own money. Once I saw what it was like to have your own money, I never wanted it any other way. Yeah. I don't want to ask anybody for anything.
So was cutting grass the first job you said?
Exactly. Dad brought a lawnmower home. I said, can I borrow it? And every Saturday, I'd make me about $12.
Really?
Yep.
How much a yard?
$1.50 to $3.
Oh, you were rolling it in.
And if I made $5, that was a really big yard. Yeah. And back then there was no weed eaters. It was a cane knife you trim with.
Right. Oh, I remember the cane knife.
Yeah.
I was so happy when somebody invented the weed eater.
Oh yeah, me too. I remember that when they advertised. The first one that came out was the electric one.
I say this to everybody who'll listen, but when I was dropped off at Vanderbilt, every day in the bus, I'd go in the boiler room and talk to Mr. Lasang, who was the janitor for the whole school. He was in charge of the school. And he'd teach me how to heat the school. Brother Bernard walked in one day with a pipe with some string on the end and a Briggs & Stratton engine. And I said, brother, what is that? He said, come see, I'll show you. He had invented a weed eater. And he goes around and he's doing the fences and everything, and I'm amazed. A few years later, the weed eater comes out. And I always said if Brother Bernard would have patented his device, Vanderbilt would be on 8 city blocks right now.
Yeah, that's right.
But just, it made life a lot easier, didn't it?
It did. It done a lot of work.
So how did you First of all, where'd you meet your wife? And let's talk about your family a little bit, because your son likes to talk about you. It's always good when the sons talk about the family. It means y'all did pretty good.
Right. Well, actually, my wife Nancy, she lived right across the street.
Did you cut her grass too?
My father-in-law, we were just talking about the other day. The way he got the grass cut, he wouldn't do it. He'd send Nancy out, and he knew I wasn't going to let Nancy cut the grass. We were just talking about that the other day.
Oh, wow.
And he says, well, it worked.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
So she was right across the street?
Right across the street.
What was her maiden name?
She was a Bergeron.
Okay.
And the Bergerons, most of those Bergeron families were from South Down. They were one of them that used to live in those old houses. Mm-hmm. The Bergeron family, well, there was a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, how did you end up from Cross Terrebonne General right there in that subdivision all the way to Dulorge?
I was actually going to move and go further back on Walnut Street and buy a house that was for sale. Well, right at the end, the people backed out. Well, I did a little stint roughnecking in the oil field. Mm-hmm. I was working 12 hours on, 24 off. So tired when you came in, you didn't have time to spend the money. So I told my wife, I said, you know what? I'm going to build us a new house. She said, Dale, you ain't but 19 years old. I said, well, I was working for Philip LeCointe, and we got the first house framed up and bought $11,000, everything turnkey.
Really?
Yeah, and it wasn't me building it, but it took me. I was working 40 hours a week on the house and 40 on the job. And look, in those days, like I said, I wasn't much more than a teenager, and then we had one child, So I had Britt and Stacy. That's my other two children, and Britt's doing MRIs. Stacy's a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but with all that done, was Dulorge sort of like a new horizon to you?
Well, my father was from
Okay, all right.
Dulorge. Yeah. Every Sunday as a child, we'd go to Dulorge, and we'd just have watermelon under the trees and just sitting. There was no air conditioning. Grandpa and them had a little bitty house,
Mm-hmm.
So I wound up buying a lot right on the side of Grandpa's, just about. Yeah. And there was a wooded field with trees on it, and we cleared the trees off of it.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm.
Always very spacious area.
Yeah.
If you look at Dulorge, sure, there's some settlements that developed over the years, but there had to be a lot to do.
Oh, yeah.
Did y'all rabbit hunt, deer hunt?
Like the first house I owned, I lived in that one on Tina Street for about 9-10 years, sold that one. Decided we didn't want to live in a subdivision, so that's when we went down by Grandpa's. Bought that property, and in those days the water was still fresh, the cypress trees were really doing good, and then Travis and Britt, they lived in the marsh. I mean, they hunted and fished all the time.
And he still loves outdoors, catfishing and everything.
Yeah, Travis has no end to it, and we bought a place in Toledo Bend, and that's what I tell people about Toledo Bend is that it's very much like Houma was when we were growing up. You don't see a red light.
Yeah.
You barely got a blacktop road. It's just laid back in one of the top 10 places to retire to. So Travis just made us, he came up this past weekend, and we had a great time.
Was math your strong? Because when you're building houses, one thing I learned, I watched my dad do a lot of carpentry work. I worked for Mr. Leroy Hebert 2 summers in a row.
Plumber, huh?
I was a plumber's helper. And my dad said, you're going to work for Mr. Leroy Hebert. And I'm thinking to myself, well, good, he lives across the street. This could be a great job. Let me tell you, crawling under houses with spiders and everything else and running pipe, I learned that I absolutely wanted a college education.
Exactly.
But he cut no corners with me. And I learned that these good contractors are meticulous. And if you didn't sand down, wasn't no PVC back then. I had to learn how to do soldering of the pipes and all that.
Yeah.
But that was good learning. And I guess when you're building a house, everything's as good as the foundation. If you're a little bit off on the foundation, that whole house is going to be off.
Yeah. And you mentioned just now about you doing that. Both my boys did it. And I told Nancy, I said, I'll make sure these boys are going to want to go to school. They came, and sure enough, Britt, he worked with me in the summers. Now he's working in the air conditioning.
Yeah.
And Travis, he did a little stint in the oil field, and he got this job open in the Houma Police Department, and he really enjoyed his job.
Yeah, now he's the police chief. But were you tough on him?
Oh, yes, I was. Yeah. Very, very tough on him.
And did you get that from your upbringing, that old school?
Well, like I said, upbringing, making your own money, that's what turned me into a business person.
Right.
I mean, even the paper routes, you had to be dedicated and make sure that one of my customers was Mr. Funderburg. He was the last one I delivered to. And you'd go in his office, and if there was a paper missing or something, he had, now this is a millionaire, he'd had that on his calendar, and he'd deduct that. Now, you're making a penny a paper. He deducts 50 cents, well, you're going backwards now.
Yeah.
So I said, Mr. Funderburg, I said, let me tell you something. You're the last man on the route. There's no way I'm going to skip you. I said, somebody's taking your paper. I said, because there's no way you're going to do it. But I said, don't keep on accusing me of not delivering your paper, because that might happen. You might not get one, you know. He was something else.
How old were you when you were talking? Because growing up, he was larger than life.
He was, and I didn't know who he was.
Yeah, he was the man.
He was Houma.
And all those old businessmen like that were very frugal with their money.
Oh yeah.
Literally, they counted pennies.
Oh yeah. And he was exactly like that. You know, he was a very tough person. You know.
But you handled it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So is that what you try to teach your kids along the way?
Yeah. And look, my daughter, we grew up in Dularge. Now, Dularge is a great place to live for boys. Mm-hmm. Not a great place to live for girls. And she still lets me know that to this day, that why did you ever move out of the subdivision? I said, well, Stacy, we got your own property. You go fishing and hunt. She says, not good for girls.
Unless you're a town boy, huh?
That's right. But and she had lived on Dularge for a little while, but she's living back in Houma now.
For all of your cases, including those with catastrophic significance, call Waits and Downer Law Firm. This one-on-one program has been brought to you by the law offices of Waits and Downer.